All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a really clinical look at a piece of extreme online writing. Now, our goal here isn't to debate its claims, but to really dissect its argument and its rhetorical style. By sticking strictly to the source material, we're going to see exactly how this kind of argument is built, from the ground up.
So right out of the gate, the text hits you with this. It's obviously designed for maximum shock value. It immediately sets this incredibly aggressive, confrontational tone, and it sets up the central contradiction that the entire piece is built around. This is the core tension we're going to break down step by step.
So to really get it, we're just going to follow the author's logic. We'll kick things off with the central accusation, and then we'll look at its two main pillars. First, a claim of total dominance, and second, this conflicting story about being a victim. From there, we'll dive into the author's, psychological diagnosis and see how it all comes together in a final argument of hypocrisy.
Okay, so let's dive into part one, the central accusation. What is the one single idea that's driving this entire piece of writing? And there it is. The author is basically arguing that this whole idea of white victimhood isn't a real fear at all, but that it's a manufactured psychological defense mechanism. It's a projection, right? And it's designed to hide what the author sees as an undeniable reality of global control. Everything else we're going to look at is built to support this one single foundation.
So, how does the author even start to build this case? Well, the first premise is all about establishing the sheer scale of this alleged power. The text isn't just hinting at influence, no. It's arguing for absolute, total, global control.
And to make this point, the author specifically targets these institutions. They're identified as the pillars of what the text calls pale-ass supremacy. Now, in this view, these aren't just powerful organizations, they are completely controlled machines for maintaining dominance. Everything from finance and tech to media and global governance.
Okay, now for the second premise, and this is where that core contradiction really comes into play. After laying out this idea of total power, the author immediately pivots to what they describe as a manufactured and completely contradictory narrative of fear.
You can see the strategy here, right? It's all about creating this really stark contrast. On one side, they list these fears that they attribute to their opponents. And on the other side, they present these direct counterclaims as if they're just objective reality. The goal here is purely rhetorical. It's to frame these fears as a total fantasy, completely detached from the truth as the author presents it.
And, to really hammer this point home, the author uses some pretty extreme hyperbole. This quote is a perfect example. By mashing up this huge claim of genocide with a totally mundane everyday event, the author is trying to ridicule this perceived victim narrative, painting it as just a dramatic and baseless overreaction.
So, if this massive contradiction exists, why? What's the explanation? This is where the text takes a turn, moving away from political claims and into, a psychological diagnosis. And this is a pretty common tactic in this kind of writing. You shift the argument away from ideas and onto the supposed psychological failings of your opponent.
The author actually coins this term, cuckold syndrome. We're presenting it here exactly as it's used in the text. The critical point from the author's point of view is that this isn't just some political belief. No, it's an obsessive psychological fantasy. A fantasy that they claim is then used to push for very real political goals.
And it doesn't stop there. The text keeps going down this psychosexual path with another one of its own terms, repressed homoerotic envy. Again, as defined by the source, this is presented as this deep-seated envy of the perceived virility of other groups, which the author says is the root cause for this obsessive focus on outside threats. So what's the point of all these diagnoses? Well, according to the author, there's a very clear purpose. They argue that this whole psychological drama is just a big strategic distraction. By focusing so obsessively on external scapegoats, the group avoids having to confront what the text frames as its own internal decay and its own self-inflicted problems. And that brings us to the home stretch, the final section of the argument. This is where all those pieces, the claim of dominance, the victim narrative, and that psychological diagnosis, all get synthesized into one big final accusation.
So let's just recap the flow of the argument here, because it follows a pretty clear three-step path. It starts with past actions, colonization, conquest, and connects them to present-day dominance through all those institutions we talked about. And then it smashes all of that against what it frames as a completely contradictory victim narrative. This whole progression is designed to lead you, the reader, to one and only one conclusion.
And that conclusion is summarized in this final, incredibly aggressive quote. This is the synthesis of the entire text.
It uses the most inflammatory language possible to label this perceived contradiction as brutal hypocrisy, framing it as a kind of role reversal that the rest of the world just finds absurd.
So now that we've taken this whole argument apart piece by piece, I think it leaves us with a really important question. When you look at the structure, the language, the psychological claims, is the primary goal here a genuine, if very extreme, political critique, or is the main purpose just to use rhetorical shock to provoke and disrupt? Understanding that distinction, I think, is key to understanding the nature of this kind of communication.